the title of our webinar, Forget Everything You Know About Change, because we realize that there is a lot of ideas that we all have about change. And we're also very excited because we're going to be talking about some superpowers that we all have that we don't even realize them. And so that is actually the bit that we are super excited about. So in the last week, in the last webinar that we had, at the end, I had the pleasure of talking to some people that participated that are very close to me. And some of them said, well, you know, I know a lot about changes, and I know about how to tell a different story about change. And I think that's a really common idea in today's world, right? We are familiar with the fact that we think, and that the fact that thought has a really important role in our lives. And so some of us have learned to tell a different story. It's like, okay, we're going to tell a different story about change, or we are going to manage change. We're going to do certain techniques. I'm going to try to reframe change and all this stuff. So that is not the focus of this training. So we are not focusing on changing, managing, reframing change. We really hope that at the end of today, you'll be able to see that there is a completely different way that we can experience any change, okay? And that's a bit, it's a subtle difference, but it's an enormous difference, because what we're proposing is that the way that we've been experiencing change is not the whole story. Marina, I don't know if you want to add anything at this point.
Yeah, well, it's just really to emphasize that we are talking about a radically different way to experience change, to view it and to experience it, so that we can really go through it with more ease and more confidence.
Great, thank you. So at the end of today, there are two things that we're hoping you're going to get. One of them is to understand why we experience change with difficulty, pain, and resistance. And the second is to see and to discover that you're actually perfectly prepared to deal with any change that comes your way. So that's our focus. Okay. So we have been researching this for the last year or so. And what we realized is that we have a paradigm of change currently worldwide, seems like, through just about every culture, that positions change as difficult and undesirable, even painful. And we were looking through different websites and different information, and I like to share with you some of the things that we found. So in literature, we have found that as early as 1831, Mary Shelley, which wrote Frankenstein, wrote this quote: "Nothing is so painful to the human mind as a great and sudden change." Right? And then our dear friend, Tony Robbins, he's not our dear friend, but you know, I like to say our dear friend, Tony Robbins. In 2015, he said something about change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And there is this lady called Mandy Hale. You know, I'm not super hip on social media, but apparently she's like really big. She's a bestseller in New York. And she wrote something about change is painful, but not as painful as staying the same. When we were Googling and we did a search of pain and change, we found 1.5 billion entries. Now, when we search for change and happiness, we found some, but a lot less. We found 193 million. So when you start looking at this, what you start realizing is that the way that we're looking at change is pervasive. And so it has like a deep reach and a wide reach, right? Because we have an idea that change is really, it's almost like change, pain. And Marian and I had a client just recently, and he was saying, you know, I just have the idea that change needs to be avoided at all cost. So this is really, really, really common. Now, this is what's happened in our world. We have accepted that as a fact. We have accepted the fact that change is difficult, painful, and it must be avoided at all cost. And based on that, there has been a lot of programs that are trying to be helpful, but they are creating material based on this paradigm. So most advised, most techniques, most programs that we have found that deal with change or try to help us with change are based on this idea that we all have accepted, and it is in our literature, it's in our music, it is in our self-help books, it is in our social media, it's just everywhere. So we just wanted to give you a sense that how we see change really is very pervasive, and it's ingrained almost in every single culture and probably throughout the centuries. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but I was like really shocked. 193 million entries with change and happiness, and 1.5 billion with change and pain, right? So there's a contrast there.
Now, we do recognize that sometimes we go, well, while we are going through change, we may feel uncomfortable, we may feel pain, we may feel that we struggle. I mean, that is true. While we're going through change, we may have these experiences. What is also true is that we have a tendency to make up a story in our minds about how we are feeling and attribute it to circumstances. So sometimes I may be feeling a little grumpy or a little irritable, and for sure I will look at my husband and I will find a reason why he's caused that, right? So we have this tendency, and then what also happens is while change is happening, we will at times feel uncomfortable and feel we are struggling, and it is common to then create a mental story about that many times is invisible to us, but that is causing real feelings of discomfort and pain. And then just the same as I find all the reasons to assign my grumpiness to my husband, we then assign our pain to the change. So suddenly we've got the evidence that change is painful. But what really tends to happen is that we are very good at creating mental stories about our experience. And that's what completes the loop. So there we go. The paradigm that change is painful is true because I feel pain and there is change. So this is something that Gabriela and I were considering and going, that's interesting. And that's why we end up with this paradigm, and we end up reinforcing the paradigm again and again. So it becomes more pervasive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in our last webinar, there was a participant, and she's a human resource director of company. And, she's really aware of all of this. She's done some training on this. not our training, but other kind of training. And she says, you know, I know that we can experience it differently. And then towards the end of the webinar, she said, you know, one of the things that I say a lot in my company out loud in my meetings is, well, we're not good at change, are we? And I just want to stop saying that. And so what Marian just said is something that happens so invisibly for me too, right? I'm experiencing change. I have this idea that it's difficult somewhere in the, like in the back of my mind. Then I experience difficulty as I'm experiencing change. And innocently at times I say, see, it's true. So we wanted to bring that to light to you, because this is how we perpetuate that change is difficult. Are you ready for an exercise?
Yeah, maybe can I clarify something else here, Gabriela, that just to emphasize that what we are saying is not that we need to change our story about change. Maybe now say, oh, change is good, because sometimes change is not good. Sometimes change is not bad. What we are saying is that that change being painful is a story. It's not a fact. So what we are interested in is, okay, what is the fact then, rather than bringing in a different story? And we'll talk more about that a little later.
Thank you. Thank you, Marian. Okay, so this is our fantastic exercise, okay? We want you to think of a time when you experienced change, and at first you did not know what to do. So we're going to give you like just a few seconds to think about that. So a time where you experienced change, maybe it was self-imposed, maybe it was imposed by others, maybe it was sudden, but you really didn't see a clear path ahead. Now, what we're interested in finding from you, and you can use the chat for this, is how was that experience at first when you really didn't know what to do? Yeah, so Amanda says it's scary. Is that a common thing for us? Like, raise your hand, raise your, right? If you just don't know what to do, it's like, ooh, what's going to happen here? Yeah, Marian agrees. Okay. Anybody else would like to tell us? Okay,
Maria says disempowering and troubling.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anybody else? How is the experience of coming to a new change where you just don't know what to do?
And if you can't think of a change, something that just occurred to me was, you know, when the pandemic started a couple of years ago, and suddenly, I think that was a change for all of us, when we found out, well, cannot meet people in person anymore, and suddenly we're in lockdown, and I don't know about you, but oh, can be exciting. Okay, yes, that's true too. Yeah, absolutely.
Linda, you're answering the other question. You have to wait for the next exercise here.
No, but I think this is good because some people may experience that initial shock of change as an exciting thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, whatever your experience was, how was your outlook when you were either scared or disempowered, or when you feel trouble? how is your outlook of the possibilities of the future of the situation? Pessimistic, yeah.
Bleak.
And how is your confidence in your ability to deal with this, or in your ability, or in your sense of, I'm going to be able to do this gracefully and fine?
Well, I think that the pessimistic and bleak comment kind of says that.
You know, it's interesting, right? Because when we are experiencing that and we feel this sense of pessimism and we're looking towards the future, all of a sudden we feel shaky about how are we going to do this? I may not be like really good at this. And there are a few people that I've heard that have told me, you know, I'm just not good with changes.
We've got a comment from Amanda and from another one. Oh, we've got several coming. Sue. It becomes overwhelming and full of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Maria says, initially there is a belief that I have this, but reality often buttresses against that, and I lose confidence in my ability to handle this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Amanda says it comes and goes, sometimes hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and I think this is pretty common, right? Like, I go into fight mode. Oh, yes. Yes. Yes, that's right. This is another thing, because right, it's just like, let me go at this. So this is, I think, a common experience. This is not that unusual, right? Like, you could be a pretty self-assured human being and you can still experience this. Now we're going to take the exercise a little bit farther. What happens after a while? So you're faced with the change. You don't know what to do. Maybe you start feeling a little anxious. Linda gets excited. Some of us get excited, right? But if you don't get excited and you're in that space of like, oh, geez, you know, how's this going to go? We just start going into the fight mode. After a while, what happens? What happens after we settle a little bit?
Gardner says, oh, I moved too quickly. Maybe you do not have to do anything. And so it can become normal.
Mm-hmm.
Maria, eventually one settles into the change. And Amanda says acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Linda, see new possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this common for everybody? Like, are you familiar with this experience of maybe you get like worried or concerned, but then the mind starts settling and then you start figuring out, okay, this is my next step? Is that a common experience for all of us here? Yeah, it's a very common experience, right? So isn't it interesting that this is a very common experience that we all have gone through? Okay, let's just settle down. And yet there is such a bad reputation about change from, you know, for the general population. So this really puzzled us because Marian and I have worked with people for a long time, and we have been studying this, and Marian is going to be telling you some of the things that we've gone through and some of the things that we have come up with.
Yeah, so like I'm sure some of you, we work with people and with teams and in organizations, and people going through change. Sometimes they have chosen that change. Maybe somebody is changing their career. Maybe somebody is changing their location, their geography, going to a different country with their families. But sometimes the change is imposed, like in a company restructure, for example. And we've noticed something quite interesting. I don't know if you've noticed this. Some people do well through those periods of change. Some people even seem to thrive during periods of change and enjoy the challenge of it, the novelty of it. And some people seem to drag behind and the struggle and find themselves dragging their feet. So that is very interesting, right? So how can that be if that paradigm was true, that change is painful, undesirable, then we would all react similarly to it. So it is true as well that recently we've gone through many changes. I think everybody has gone through changes. Going virtual, I don't know if you're still working mostly virtually. I am. Gabriela and I work virtually across very different time zones. I don't think we could get any farther, Gabriela, or maybe tiny bit. If you move to Hawaii, then it cannot get any worse than that. Or if I move to, I don't know where I would have to move. But so big changes, right? And also the pandemic has put in front of us, I think it's not just the change that we've had to go through it, but that it seems to have catalyzed many other changes. Like, for example, artificial intelligence, that had started before, but it has completely accelerated. The way we are working is different already and is changing more and more. So we really have spent the last year and a half researching this, researching change, the current paradigm, and asking ourselves, is that just an idea that change is hard? Is that just a story we're telling ourselves and that we keep reinforcing? Or is there a different paradigm? And this is the paradigm that we want to talk to you about, which is the one that actually acknowledges our natural capacity to deal with change, any change that comes our way, with resourcefulness, with agility, with resilience, with creativity, with ingenuity. And this is what we really want to talk more about and explore together.
So we are going to talk to you about what we have found this last year. It's surprising, it's shocking, it's wonderful. And so we asked ourselves, let us see really how good we are at change. And so we've researched these areas. We've researched the biological area. We've researched developmental areas. We've researched the anthropological areas. We've researched the cultural areas and the psychological. And I have to tell you, we are pleasantly shocked and surprised. So I want to start with the biological because this is probably one of the most shocking things that I found. Okay. So we're going to start at the very beginning. At the very beginning of how you were conceived. So all of us on Earth were conceived and we needed only 2 cells, right? But by the time we're born, we have 26 billion cells. So in 9 months, we go through one of the most spectacular, rapid changes that we have experienced as human beings, biologically. With no effort, with no knowledge, this is just sort of what happens. Now, what's fascinating is after conception, day 5 or 6, our cells actually start dividing into different kinds of cells. So you have bones and skins and organs and all kinds of stuff. This is automatically from the beginning. Every minute we shed between 30 and 40,000 skin cells. Every minute, right? And you don't have to schedule it. You don't have to focus on it. You don't have to practice it. You don't have to meditate about it. This is just what happens. And every 2 to 4 cells, we actually have a completely different outer skin layer because we're continuously regenerating. Our heart is, of course, in motion. So every single day it beats 1,000 times. And it pumps around 2,000 gallons of blood. Now, this one, I just don't even know how to process it. So every second, our body makes 2 million red cells. Every second, right? Our brain, even during sleep, is in motion and it's changing, and it gets all the memories from the day and it actually cements it into long-term memory. So when you look at your biology, when we start paying attention to our biology from inception, we actually get into the train of change. Developmentally, by 2 months, we begin to recognize people and we begin to act bored if things don't change. By 4 months, we start showing curiosity. By a year, we can follow simple directions. And by 4 years, we can start predicting how things are going to happen. No attention needed. This is just what happens naturally. Anthropologically, we learned to deal and control fire around 800,000 years ago. And we started migrating out of Africa between 50 and 60,000 years ago. Today, we inhabit every continent on Earth. The cultural changes that we have gone through in the last few decades are remarkable. We went from having no Google, right? Nobody had Google before 1997. And now in 2002, it became a verb. Who doesn't Google? Everybody Googles, even my 93-year-old mother-in-law, right? I don't know if you remember this, but we went from 8-track, I guess, at one point there was the record, then there was the 8-track, right? But more recently, we went to Napster, and that's when we started downloading music. That was a big hoopah, right? Because it's like we started getting into artists infringements and all kinds of stuff. But now who downloads music? Nobody, because everybody is listening with the streaming programs or services like Spotify. And do you remember Blockbuster? Blockbuster here in America is where you could go and actually rent the movie. And it was like, oh my God, I hope that there is a copy of this. Now, of course, we Netflix. And one of the greatest things, I think, because this starts moving us from the cultural to the psychological, is in the past, we really wanted to memorize things because it was helpful to us. And now we all have moved to learning how to search for things. Our psychology is also at work and changing all the time, all the time, all the time. So have you noticed that your moods and your feelings and your ideas can change so quickly inside of you without nothing outside changing? You can be in a meeting or in a class like this, and I'm sure this has not happened here, but then all of a sudden you can start thinking about, I'm wondering what I'm going to cook for dinner tonight. And you're still here, right? We are able to adapt to situations, even when we don't want to. Like probably nobody on earth really wanted to use a mask everywhere where we went, right? I mean, nobody wanted to do that, and yet we adapted. And we are able to feel secure or insecure about our abilities at any moment. So when you start looking at this, what you realize is we have been dealing with change from the very beginning of our lives, not only individually, but as a species. We have adapted from the beginning of time. We are able to learn and to adjust to all the changes that are coming our way all the time. And in a sense, if you're alive, what we can say is that you are change in motion. You are change in motion, and our bodies biologically and psychologically and spiritually are able and do deal with change all the time. And we think it's essential for us to start understanding a lot more about this. You know, today is just kind of like a little taster, the top of the iceberg in a sense, because we only have a very limited amount of time. But I have to tell you that in the year and a half that Marina and I have spent together learning about this, there were a few times where I was here in my office and I was in awe at our capacity to be in change. And there was one particular moment where, you know, with the sales and this whole thing, where I just felt like I'm supported. I don't have to worry so much, and I don't have to learn so much. I may not know what to do with this particular change in this moment, but I know that our natural ingenuity will give me the next step. And that was a huge relief. We would like you to take a moment. We would like you to reflect on that even further. Because once we start discovering, once we start reflecting on this more and more and more, what we start seeing is that there is a paradigm that we're operating from that is not accurate, that positions change as unpleasant, right, and non-desirable. And yet, every single day and every single moment of our lives, we are in change, and we deal with it just perfectly fine. And so we want to present a paradigm that is accurate and that considers the fact that we deal with change just fine because we are able to be resourceful, because we are creative, because we are actually responsive, and because we're agile to deal with changes. And it would be in our best interest really to look into this direction, because we will start experiencing change in a completely different way.
Yes, so we were asking ourselves these questions, Gabriela and myself, like why, how come we have such resistance to change when we're actually experiencing change all the time? That's the first one. The second one, well, how come we've developed a story that says that change is difficult and undesirable? How did we end up doing that? And then thirdly, if we think about the way that we, the training about change and the many workshops about change operate, and I have delivered some of these, so I've been in it. How can we come up with truly effective strategies to deal with change when the basis upon which they are built hinders us? It's a basis of, it is uncomfortable, I don't want it, it's hard. So how, if the basis is wrong, how can we build a stable house upon a foundation that is shaky? So these were the questions in our minds, and we did have some insights as a result of pondering about that. And probably for me, the biggest one that keeps coming back every time Gabriela goes on about all those biological, anthropological, developmental, is, gosh, life is change. Can there be life without change? So it's so much us that we don't even see it. So there is that one. And then we also recognize that it is possible to experience change with more ease and confidence. It is possible. And that it is the stories that are often invisible and happening in the background about our discomfort we may experience at times at the same time that change is happening, that we get entangled around. And so we really want to invite you to reflect on what are the stories you tell yourself about change. What are the assumptions that you make about change when it first arrives? So I was thinking about this, and I realized that a story I tell myself all the time about change is that it sounds something like this. Ah, how inconvenient. All that time and effort for this. It's going to be hard. It's inconvenient, a lot of time and effort that is going to get lost, and it's going to be hard to go through it. Actually, it's going to be hard is, in fact, an assumption. I'm assuming that it's going to be tedious and hard, and really I'm losing something that I have invested a lot in. And that's just a story that comes up in my mind when I face change. But you will have your own very individual ones. And it's really helpful to know that for me, because I know that's my go-to place. I know when it shows up, I recognize it now much more. And I know that I am falling into that old paradigm, current paradigm of difficulty. So we would love to, Gabriela, did you want to add something?
No, go ahead.
We would love to talk to you more and explore with you more this new paradigm about change, which really is about acknowledging that natural, innate, effortless ability we all have to deal with any change that may come our way. And Gabriela is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, and we wanted to, we were so hopeful that we all could experience change in a completely different way. We were so hopeful about that. And we were hopeful because we realized that although we have experienced change all along, as we've seen through the history of being alive, one of the things that felt to us is that the rhythm and the velocity of change is just getting a little bit faster because we have technology, right? We have technology. And so, it just seems like it's part of what the change is about right now. And we hear a lot of people say, I just don't have any certainty. I don't have any sense of knowing. I feel so uncertain about the future because everything is changing. Everything's changing just so quickly. So we we were really noticing those two things. We are having to deal with change all the time. And right now, it just seems like it's a little bit more rapid. And wouldn't it be wonderful if all of us could really tap into our natural ability to be resourceful and creative? And so we came up with a program that's called Reimagining Change at Work. Why at work? Because most of us have to work, and most of us work, with people in teams. There are two things that we're hoping to do. We are hoping to really kind of pop this idea that change is difficult, and we're hoping to really acknowledge fully the fact that we are completely prepared. We would love for us not to suffer every time that a new change comes up, and for us to struggle and for us to feel uncertainty. And when we start recognizing the fact that we are change in motion from the very beginning, that kind of starts settling. We start really seeing the possibilities of not experiencing anxiety when any change or when every change comes up. So that's the first promise, I guess, or hope that we have with this program. The second thing that we're hoping to do is, if it's true that we are, ingenious and resourceful, how do we learn to tap into that and to harness that during times of change when we have to adapt rather quickly? So those are the two things that we're going to be doing together. We're going to be learning how to experience change in a different paradigm so we don't suffer and we don't stress out and we don't experience that sense of anxiety. And then we're going to learn how to tap into all of these abilities that we have naturally in real time. We have 6 sessions. We actually are going to begin, I'm going to share this.
3rd of March.
Into March, yes.
3rd.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Maria. We're actually going to start every Thursday in March. We're going to be together. We're going to be together for an hour and a half, and the first Thursday in April. We have an early bird of February 14th, which is Valentine's. For those of you that have partners, don't forget, February 14th is Valentine's. And then we are offering this program for 396 euros. We hope you're able to join us. We are excited about learning how to experience the next few years in a different way, with a sense of certainty and with a sense of peace of mind. And that's really why we're offering this program. We want us to really get clear on the fact that we are change in action.